Welcome to the Social Mission Revolution.
Each week we explore some of the greatest undertold stories of businesses and everyday people who are making their ultimate impact on the world through social mission. This is Social Mission Revolution,
And this is your host, Andrea Putting. Welcome to another episode of the Social Mission Revolution. Today I am here with Clint Adams, and Clint has written a book which is called Light in the Blue Flame. And I had a quick look at what his book's about, and it's fascinating, filled with subjects that are really of a big interest to me, being with the Social Mission Revolution, on making a big difference in other people's lives. And it sounds like the book is quite a fascinating read. So I wanted to spend some time today exploring with Clint what that's all about and opening up our eyes to some more amazing topics that we need to be aware of. So welcome, Clint.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Clint, I'd like to start with my question that I ask everybody.
Sure.
Is, if there was only one thing for you to fight for, what would that be?
I think for me it's really about giving young kids the best opportunities that they can. Unfortunately, as a police officer in a previous life and also through a number of other roles that I've had, one in healthcare in particular, I have a lot of kind of information around young people and some of the problems that they can have if they're from disadvantaged backgrounds and that kind of stuff. And, at the end of the day, as a cop, I've been in houses where you've seen young kids and you see what their parents are like, and, I won't say nasty things about people, but, those kids really are going to struggle to kind of have a really good life if they don't do certain things. And a lot of times they don't know they're innocent, they don't know any different. And I guess part of my whole, if I was focusing on one thing, is about trying to do things that, if they're in a position where they've had that horrible upbringing and had bad things happen to them, that they can still come out the other end and be, I guess, contributors in a really good sense in the world and come out of that with some resilience and that kind of thing. So for me, it's all about really focusing at that level, looking at, how can we take away some of those risk factors for those young people as they come through. And, I guess not everyone's born with that silver spoon in their mouth. And I guess for me, if you can do as much as you can, and look, schools can do a lot more. I really do believe that in this space, which is kind of where the book goes. And I write a story around that and try and work with a school or an imaginary school to do those things. So that's kind of my I guess quest, if you like.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There's a lot of fascinating little bits in there that are interesting to explore. So your experience in seeing what happens with families and children has obviously led you to this point, to writing your book. So I'd love to you to share a little bit about your book. I'm fascinated with the fact that you've put it into the story form, which makes it a really interesting read for people and helps them to relate, I think, probably closer to real life. When they read a story, they can empathise a bit more with it.
Yeah, I suppose it didn't start off that way. The book was an afterthought, kind of. If I rewind a bit, I was working as part of an executive team in healthcare, and I had a lot of access to a lot of information around, what ages we had with kids on antidepressants and stuff. And it was alarming to me how many kids were, I say kids, children, like 12, 13 on antidepressants. They were getting, high obesity levels, lots of, issues with dealing with potential suicides and stuff. And so the community nursing component of that healthcare facility that I worked with, I was getting a lot of information, talking to the nurses that are going out and working with these disadvantaged kids and stuff like that. And I kind of approached I became friends with a person in a previous role. She worked for a spin-off of the education department. It was called SW Len, which was kind of a supporting role for the Southwest education part down in Victoria. And long story short, I met up with her and I was talking to her about the potential to run some programs of helping kids with resilience. And I came up with a kind of course that I ran, which I used to use at work for helping our employees deal with each other better and work with each other. But I called it Red Brain, Blue Brain. And in a nutshell, I started off using that and then tried to bring it into a kind of education piece around trying to run programs for schools and working on that resilience piece. So she and I had plugged it. I'd gone and spoken to principals in some schools that were interested in it back then, and then we pitched it as a kind of pilot program through the politician down there at the time, one of the ministers. It got quite high up to potentially getting off the ground, so to speak, but then they lost the election and it went back to the drawing board type of thing. Yeah. So I was working full time. It kind of, there's a lot of work involved in trying to pitch things when you're actually working somewhere else and doing that kind of stuff. So you can't go just leave your job and go and do this stuff. So for a little while, I kind of didn't do much more. I just kept doing my HR roles and running those kinds of programs at work with the employees and stuff. But then for some reason, I kind of, you keep hearing about young kids committing suicide and coming through the news, and then there's obviously some high profile ones that come up. The most recent one was Dolly, that you might have seen, the girl with the Kubra ads. Anyway, a lot of those things just kind of still bugged me, and in the end I made a decision to use the program as a base in the book, but then I thought it would be better if it was as kind of a story, and then people can kind of relate to it a bit better than just some guy rocking up and doing a course. So the book in a nutshell starts off with a teenage boy who decides he's going to kill himself, and he's quite deliberate about wanting certain people to know certain things, the people that he believes is responsible for it, also the people that he believes are kind of indirectly responsible, the ones that kind of see him being bullied but do nothing about it and laugh and contribute to it. They're not actually bullying them, but they're not actually doing anything. And then there's also, how it impacts, obviously, his mother who finds him, some of the issues she's had in the past and how she deals with that. And then on top of that, it's, the principals and the teachers and how that all affects them. And so I've kind of brought the program into the book by having myself as a character in the book. So I'm basically there helping the school deal with the stuff I normally do, which is about leadership development and stuff like that. But at the time, this boy decides, he's going to kill himself, and then I'm kind of dragged into helping the principal deal with this particular issue. And so part of that is now, using the students to come up with some ideas of, they don't want to see it happen again. Some of them are obviously angry. Some have been friends with the boy that's now killed himself. They also know who's responsible, and so there's a lot of anger and animosity towards people, and the person that's now who was directly responsible has to deal with that, and his parents have to deal with that. And so I kind of bring all that into a big a school program where we're pulling a lot of things together. We're not saying it's the only thing out there we can do, but let's explore some things and let's work through. So the whole part of the book is about I've obviously got a fair bit of knowledge about certain things and group dynamics and all that kind of stuff, but then I'm also trying to say, well, how do I really help all these people, and how do I kind of pull it together, and how do I get them working on stuff and distracting themselves a little bit because, they're not in a good headspace. So that's kind of how it all came about from, a long time ago. I mean, it took me 6 years to actually write the book. There's a fair bit of research in it. So I do have a lot of QR codes all through the book, which goes back to stuff that I've researched and read, and it's not, it's like basically a living reference. You can use your phone and it dumps you into different websites and stuff and that kind of thing. So it was kind of deliberate about making sure that, the information I've got and the stuff that's there is all referenced properly, and that people can use it. If they do want to go and find out more about some of those topics and things, then they can do that. If they just want to read through the book, you can do that too. So yeah, it was kind of how it all panned out.
Yeah, so it's a real resource piece of material for those kind of situations.
Yes, definitely. Sorry, go.
So that if someone's been through the experience where someone they know has done the worst possible thing, then they've got other areas that they can find the support that they need amongst
Definitely. Them. And there's also a fair bit around the grieving process because, obviously people are affected by it. So there was kind of wanted to make sure that there's that resource. But then also, at the end of it is also about the proactive approaches, which is some of the things that I do think is missing at school level. There's a lot of different things and all different schools are doing different things. I know when I was living in Victoria, Geelong Grammar, brought Martin Seligman down to do his stuff, and he runs some stuff with the High Challenge up there, or Treetop, whatever it's called. There's a lot of positive psychology stuff that's coming into schools, but I just think that it tend to be the more rich schools, the ones that have got, the private schools and that kind of stuff. And I'd like to think that, that potentially there's an opportunity that out of the book can come some stuff that will be able to take into those who are more disadvantaged. Like, I'm sure that the grammar kids also have their problems, but they're probably going to be a little bit different from the public sector. And so I guess for me, it was about just looking again at those opportunities to say, well, are there things that we could be doing that could be, hopefully it'll open up other people wanting to find other things to do. I think there's many ways to the top of this mountain. Obviously psychology is a very, very broad thing and people have different experiences, but there's also a lot of common themes that seem to come up. Like even my work life is really meshed into this stuff for quite a bit because I don't know if have you heard of human synergistics?
No.
So human synergistics, they basically have this tool which is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's usually a 360-degree feedback kind of thing for managers. But what you find out of it is people with really strong fight or flight tendencies, so people who generally got an undercurrent of being fearful or an undercurrent of being aggressive, tend to be the worst managers. And based on heaps of surveys they do all around the world, and the same themes seem to come through with, as kids are progressing and learning and doing stuff, that if they have that undercurrent, they tend to have more problems, same as the managers have the problems in a managerial sense. You can also have those same kinds of problems, domestic violence. So when people are in what I call red brain, they're defensive. So things come out, they either cower away, which is obviously the flight part, or they really become aggressive, and that's where the domestic violence and has a number of impacts long term. So I really think that if we're doing things earlier on with children at school, at home, obviously if you've got a great home and great parents and all that stuff, it's going to help. And then the schools can also deal with those things a lot better. I think that to me is what I call vital behaviour stuff, that if they learn some of those things and can deal with those and have better conversations earlier on at school level, you tend to see less problems later on, and there's a fair bit of research around doing that stuff. So it's certainly was something that I wanted to ask you about, is that while your book has all this information that helps people who are grieving, who are having to get over dealing with somebody who has committed suicide, how does that work about then? If someone read the book who was thinking, who was depressed, who was starting to think that way, and see that there's be a great value for them to see that if they do this, this is what my whole community is going to have to go through. Yeah, definitely a part of that. And look, but yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because generally people that are at that point, I'm not saying all, but generally the ones that get to that point where they are suicidal. And I've worked obviously in counselling roles where I've dealt with people with PTSD who've been shot at, whatever, when I was still working with the police doing injury management work and that kind of stuff. And they're very focused on themselves, and then they're in their red brain, and they have that recurring process. So they tend not to think of everybody else. It's all about them. And so it's a tough one. Like, if someone is in that state and they're reading my book, are they going to, think about the other people, or does that? I guess it's a combination of things there. It's about people being able to feel comfortable to have a conversation. That's another piece that comes up in the book. Obviously there's more males tend to commit suicide, and there's a number of reasons for that. But a big part of the cultural stuff that I've probably grown up with my age group, where the stiff upper lip, boys don't cry and all this kind of stuff.
Toughen up, mate.
Yeah, suck it up, princess, all that stuff, right? So there's those comments that stick in your head when as you're growing up, and so that it still lingers around, because people just think, oh, are they going to think this of me, or are they going to think that of me? And that's another part of what I put in the book. There's something called the dialogue model, where literally what you're saying in your head is also a conversation of how you kind of interact with the world. Like, if you're fearful about saying something, well, you're not going to say it. Again, fight or flight, again, that dominance kicks in. And I see it a lot even at the work level, where people just don't interact well, or they won't say stuff to people face to face, but then they'll bitch and moan behind people's backs, and then that creates a different group dynamic and all that kind of stuff. And, it's no different with schools. You've got the popular kids, and then they laugh at the other kids, and they're not wearing the right clothes, and all these things come into the equation. So you can't stop a lot of that stuff, but you can have people feel comfortable about it. Like, do I really care that you don't like my T-shirt? Maybe I do, because I'm 12 or 13, right? And that's a big deal for me. But, I guess that's the part that I'm also talking about, where if we can get it right at a school level, people just feel comfortable going, you've had that conversation, you're saying stuff about me, I don't really like it. Or at least the other people around them are also involved and feel comfortable to have those conversations, because they've done it before, made them feel uncomfortable, but they still have them. And, there's a fair bit of research around those conversations and stuff. It's a really good article called Silence Kills, which was done on in a hospital situation in America. And, the people that were able to have really good, crunchy conversations when people are doing the wrong thing, or, this is about nurses doing the wrong thing, and they're seeing it, and they're so concerned about that nurse not doing their job properly that they'll go and check up on that person doing the job, rather than telling the nurse or talking about it or taking it to. That's why we have to have whistleblower things and policies and all that kind of stuff, because people are scared to do stuff, are scared to say stuff, because there's consequences for that. But ultimately, the skill of doing that early on has massive ramifications later on, where people feel, as they grow up with that, and it becomes part of day to day at school, for example. So I would say that if we could do more of that stuff really early on at school, where it's structured for kids, they don't know that they're, we're actually trying to build that resilience in them in a passive way, but by have them actively saying, okay, today we're going to do this, this and this, and have those conversations with that dialogue model in mind. You'll start to see some more of that resilience things coming out, is what I foresee anyway.
Yeah, so there's really in that level of importance of just teaching young people that we need to talk to each other, we need to open up and have those conversations rather than pushing them aside.
Definitely. It's about nurturing courage, I guess, where you feel courageous enough, but you do feel uneasy. Like, I've had heaps of these conversations where you go, ugh, really dreading having this conversation with somebody for whatever reason it is, like at work, or someone's going to get fired or whatever. But you still have to do it, and you have to. The thing I love about the dialogue model is it does put things into perspective, and you can kind of go inside and say, well, I'm not feeling good about it because this, but at the same time, I don't have to be. The great thing about the dialogue model, again, it has that fight or flight part to it. So when I'm having conversations, or having even a mediation with two people who don't get on, for example, and you have it in front of you, you're saying, I'm going to be looking for someone who's being aggressive or being defensive. So I kind of look for that in the conversation, so we can have the proper conversation in the middle based on what we really need to explore or talk about. And so it's a good model to use, I think, as part of a basis for setting good group dynamics up, which is what I use it for in the work sense. But this is a little bit different. We're looking at a kind of mass group session, if you like, at a school level. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
Yeah, and I think it helps sometimes to have some kind of formality around a model when it comes to having those conversations, because you can then, if everyone knows, okay, this is the model that we're working with, this is how we're going to do it. When things start to go one way or the other, there is something, you bring them back, you say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, let's re-look at the model, where are we at, and let's, so that we can move forward. Whereas if you don't have that, you don't always get into that depth of the conversation that you really need to. You can easily flip her around.
And look, in my previous work roles, I've done exactly that. So you've got a team, we run the red brain, blue brain session. So I really explain to them not too much detail, but around how we kind of learn. And when we're young, we learn quite passively. You know, you just take things in, you don't know language yet. And we kind of form an undercurrent, and what's happening around you. And this is where I say the disadvantaged kids probably are from those homes where maybe there's not a lot of money, mum and dad are yelling at each other. There's, you know, all those things have an effect on this child and what's around them, and they take it in passively. Now, if dad's really aggressive and he's, you know, there's the domestic violence in the house and that kind of stuff, it has that impact on the person. So, you know, as a child, there's that fear factor already. So you're already having an undercurrent of fear before you even do anything, you know, at school level. So there's 4 or 5 years of having to live around that stuff. And so there's certainly common themes that would say, you know, this kid's probably unlikely to end up being a great student who's earning great money and being a massive contributor. Not that they can't be, but the risk factors just add up.
And we don't look at those. We just, I guess in a school situation where you've got hundreds of students or you've got 20 to 30 in a classroom, you just look at the student and all you can see is what is in front of you. You can't see what's going on behind closed doors at home.
Correct.
Or what social groups outside of that student is influencing it.
Correct.
Influencing them. So with all those factors in place, if they can see those, then you can start to understand, and maybe then the student can grow and develop in a greater way. But when you've got 100 students or hundreds of students to deal with, I guess that's a difficult thing. So having some way of looking at that would be invaluable, I would think.
And look, I mean, I totally agree. And the other thing about those kind of kids too, they can sometimes be the troublemakers. So the teachers don't want to spend time with them. So the ones that need it the most get the least. You know, that kind of stuff too. So there's definitely, you know, and again, it's also about, I guess, understanding that obviously kids are all different, right? But at the same time, there's things that we could be looking at and grooming it and saying, well, we've got to assume that everybody's had a bad upbringing, and let's just work on that kind of process, which is kind of where I'm saying, well, we need to set some things in place early on, especially, I mean, if we can get to it early on, as in the first years as they come into school, and just becomes every day there's a certain period of the day, probably towards the end of the day, where, you know, that they're having conversations amongst each other about what someone did to each other and getting them feel comfortable. It's about getting rid of that undercurrent of, oh, I don't want to say stuff. We get, you know, and you're coaxing it, but you're giving them a skill, but you're also giving them an opportunity to say, hang on, this isn't good. And then the whole group's also hearing it. So there's a combination of things. It isn't just about me by myself. I can be fine, but when you put other people in there and it's a social context, again, it's that, you know, how others can influence, because then others also feel, oh, I heard Clint talk about that yesterday and he didn't like it. And so they hear it, you know, it's proper dialogue. It's dealing with what's actually happening to them, how people are feeling about that, feeling comfortable with that. And that's my point around, you know, people hearing about it. Oh, it's okay to cry if you're a boy, and you can say it, and they're done. So you're doing a number of things all at once by using just one kind of skill set. You're getting people to talk. You're getting people to feel uncomfortable and still talk about things that make them feel a bit uncomfortable. They're getting better at it. You're kind of in a controlled environment, so they're not just out there going, "You're an idiot," and "I'm this," So the conversation's completely outside of the dialogue model. Somebody's controlling it, but giving them that skill set. So just, the way I see it is just that opportunity to give them that, you're guiding them without, it's kind of unstructured, but to your point, the model still sits there. And as a teacher or whoever's coordinating it, they get better at it too, because then they start to look for those things themselves. And if they understand that dialogue model really well, they also understand a bit more of the psychology behind that and why this person's feeling uncomfortable. You can kind of coax it, like when I'm dealing with people who don't get on, and the harder ones are the ones that go silent, who are the defensive ones, because they say nothing. The other one gets angry and you can pick them pretty quick, right? But so getting that skill set into the teachers too, I think is an important part, because then how they interact and how they get the others to interact becomes a skill in itself as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's all about creating a safe place for kids to communicate, to be able to, even though they might feel uncomfortable, they feel safe. This is somewhere that they can open up and communicate with each other, and giving them those skills which they take through life, which is so important. Because if they can learn them and they can understand and use them in their life, then when they have children, they'll be teaching their children how to communicate at a level that far beyond what they ever understood.
100%. Because what I see in the work sense, I've run sessions where I've got people to give other people feedback. I do what I call a stop, start, continue. And then they basically put it on paper. They have to pick a certain number of people in their team, depending on the size of the team. And they want, but there's specific rules of the feedback. You can't just say stop being a tool. You want to say stop being aggressive, or, something that's very specific about the behaviour. And so, some people really struggle with doing that. They used to come to me and say, I don't really want to do this. I'm like, well, okay, you don't have to. I'm not trying to force you. But if you want to see, if someone's doing things that affect you badly in a negative sense at work or that kind of stuff, then if you say nothing, like doing nothing and saying nothing is actually doing something, because you're not doing anything. Inaction is as much an action as
Right.
So, some people they really grapple with, they think it's going to affect the relationship. Like I've probably done hundreds of them. Out of all the hundreds, there's probably 2 people that reacted super badly when I first told them what the group had said. And it's amazing what people will say, like little things like, one guy, whole heap in the team said, we want him to stop digging in his ear when he talks to us, because he's, it's distracting and it makes us feel sick. So, that was the feedback for him. And, there's like really funny things that come up in there. But if it irritates you, you're allowed to go and talk to somebody. And again, the dialogue models, once you understand that bit a bit more, and you go, well, I'm letting it bug me, and I'm going to let it continue bugging me until I do something about it. Even at work, I've got, big burly guys. I've worked in the meat industry recently. And, they're too scared to go to the manager. So they use the union rep to be their person to go and do the talking for them. You tell them this and this and that. And so you could see, the defensiveness or the concern of what's going to happen to me if I go to the manager. So, how that guy's treating us as poor or whatever. So that's how it kind of comes out. That's why there's still unions out there, because there's a lot of people that are fearful in their work environment because of what management's doing. So they need someone else to go in there and be our little champion and that kind of stuff, because they don't feel comfortable having those conversations.
Yeah. So there's a lot for us to learn along those lines of how to best open up and communicate with people and share our feelings, so that we don't end up going down those lines of depression and,
definitely,
at its worst, suicide.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, the internal dialogues are very important too, because, a lot of times that depression and things that have affected people, they've kind of talked themselves into that over the years. And yes, things have happened to them that they haven't dealt with the way they probably could have, and they maybe didn't have the tools or even the understanding of how to get themselves out of that. How do I talk to my unconscious brain in a conscious way to get myself out of this stuff, right? So, because there's that, it's the wild horse. I think Joe Dispenza says it in one of his books. The unconscious mind is like this wild horse that can take you to really great places, but if you just let it go, it can take you to some very, very bad places. And so, you've got to kind of rein it in and work with it. And so that's that internal dialogue, which I use the dialogue model for as well, about how you set yourself up. And this isn't just affirmation stuff. This is about being quite deliberate. Like, when I was doing work as a counsellor with people with PTSD, you'd be talking to them about doing a thoughts diary so they catch themselves actually, what am I thinking about? And if they do analysis work, it actually drags them out of red brain and back into what I call blue brain, where, it changes their focus a bit so that they're thinking in a future state rather than looking back on what's happened, why am I feeling like this, all that kind of stuff. So again, that self-talk is also a very important skill, which I think as we go through, we can really work on that side of things as well.
Yeah, important stuff. So if you had some advice for somebody if there was somebody maybe listening, or someone who thinks someone they know is in this kind of state, what would you say to them?
To me, it's all about interrupting. Look, when I was a police officer, I worked out only later on how quick you can. It's about getting people to focus on a future state, asking them questions, high-level questions, rather than giving advice is probably a key thing, because asking the high-level question and getting them to ask questions of themselves forces that part of the brain to think about a solution. Instead of saying, what's wrong, it's more around getting them talking and exploring and thinking about how do we get out of it? How are we going to fix this? How are we going to do this? There's a lot of ways, as I said, to the top of the mountain. Like, it's amazing. I'm not aligned to any kind of psychology theories per se, because they all work for a number of reasons. And a big part of that is they all get you to focus on something and really think it through. And that's, to me, is the key part of it. Some people go and just start running and doing things for other people. Mm-hmm. So to me, whatever that is about getting them not distracted per se, but thinking about something else that's not focusing on them. So, people have pets and, those things all work because their focus is now on something else. It's not on themselves. So the key part of any kind of intervention is about getting them thinking about something else that's not focusing on their woes and why I'm feeling so bad and all that kind of stuff. So to me, that's probably a key piece.
Yeah, wonderful. So if somebody wants to buy your book or get in touch with you to have some assistance,
sure.
How do we do that?
Well, you can go onto Amazon. You just type in Lighting the Blue Flame by Clint. There's a number of places you can buy it. I do know that it does come from the UK at the moment, so there's been problems with people getting the actual physical copies. It takes about a month or so or a bit more to get through with COVID at the moment, but it's on Kindle. You just have to look it up. There's a number of different places that sell it, some in different countries. So, but I know that it has taken a while to get to Australia if you're buying it here to get a physical copy, because some of my friends have told me they've been waiting 2 months for it. So, if you just Google it, you can find it pretty much anywhere. And these are Kindle versions, so if people want to get it quicker, they can obviously get that straight away. So,
Yep.
I think a few have done that instead of getting the actual book, but yeah.
And how do they get in touch with you if they want to?
I'm on LinkedIn. So you just type in Clint Adams or I'll put it to myself as title as author of Lighting the Blue Flame, so it wouldn't be too hard to find me. I don't do a lot of social other media stuff, so I kind of, or maybe I should down the track. But at this stage, it's just LinkedIn's probably the best way to contact me directly, and I'm more than happy to respond and do, if people want a hand with stuff like that, I'm happy to take them through that stuff as well.
Fantastic. So it's been a real pleasure talking with you today, Clint, and learning more about your book and what your social mission is. And I am sure that it's going to be making a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And And always, if we can make a difference in one child's life, then how that affects our whole community is massively.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. Obviously, as I said, I'm trying to get it out there just to try and help as many as we can. And I feel pretty passionate that we can do that. And, I want to be part of that, I guess, going forward as well.
Yeah, and it's certainly a book that I think that I'll be recommending to quite a few people, because it just sounds like it's going to be a lot of value for anyone working with young people.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clint. And that's all we have today on the Social Mission Revolution. And I'll be back next time with another Social Mission Revolutionist. This has been the Social Mission Revolution with Andrea Putting. Join me again next week when we'll speak to another Social Mission Revolutionist who will inspire you on your journey to making your ultimate impact on the world.